We'll start the session on borrowing from the European Investment Bank and other sources from the department.
Okay.
Members to pages 99 to 139.
I'm not going to just
What do you think?
Welcome to the meeting, Peter Jacobson, Jeff McGuinness, both very welcome. Do you want to give us some introductory remarks before we move into questions?
Yes, Chair, no problem. I'll just provide a brief outline of the key issues, and we can take questions after that. As you're undoubtedly aware, EIB is the only bank that's actually owned by the European member states. The key role of the bank is to provide finance and expertise for investment projects that contribute to EU policy objectives. EIB raised the bulk of its lending resources on capital markets, and it has a AAA rating, which means it can borrow at really advantageous rates, which it then passes on to clients. The EIB's priorities are really wide-ranging, allow them to invest in projects that reduce economic and social imbalances across the regions. It will invest in projects that improve the natural or urban environment, promotes innovation through investment in things like ICT and human capital. It'll invest in transport and energy infrastructure and projects that support a competitive and secure energy supply. So there's a wide range of projects that I'll actually finance. Given the relatively low cost of finance that the EIB can offer, the Finance Minister is keen that the bank will play a greater role in investing in infrastructure here in Northern Ireland. And that's the main reason why he visited EIB earlier this year. As you're undoubtedly aware, however, there are limitations as to the extent to which the executive can borrow from the EIB directly. Our response, our department's response to the committee research paper explained that position. And maybe just to summarise that, essentially the public expenditure rules make it unattractive for the executive to borrow from the EIB directly. That's because Treasury will reduce our resource there by the same amount as the loan, which would then leave us worse off. That's of course because EIB finance is repayable with interest, whereas our grant isn't. For local councils, as we also explained in our reply, this position is slightly different. Provided that councils finance repayments of any loan from their district rates, the executive's capital there will not be reduced, and there will therefore not be a corresponding reduction in public expenditure. Of course, councils can already borrow from the National Loans Fund, so for them to borrow from the EIB, of course the terms have to be better, and the National Loans Fund otherwise doesn't make financial sense to them. Okay, so looking wider, there are obviously many private sector companies, organisations in Northern Ireland that are delivering significant capital projects, and EIB could have a role in financing those. Examples would be our electricity, gas, telecoms providers. They could access EIB finance directly. There's no reason why they couldn't. And the same could be said for housing associations that deliver large-scale social housing projects. But that's just a quick sort of overview, Chair, and we're happy to take questions.
Just in terms of the first question, might it be possible to avoid a Treasury reduction in the executive's capital there if the repayments of EIB loans to executive departments were fully financed out of income generated by the executive as per the local government terms? And what scope would exist for negotiating this with the Treasury?
I think there's no scope. As you know, Treasury's agenda is fiscal consolidation. I think the last thing they want is additional borrowing. They're already giving us 200 million a year borrowing power from the RRI initiative, which is better than anyone else in other devolved administrations out there. I just can't see Treasury. I mean, we could ask, and we have done so in the past. I've no doubt they'll turn it down.
It's a flat no. Has been the response.
I think it'll be a flat no, absolutely.
In terms of local councils, to what extent have they availed of EIB loans to date, and what steps have the department taken to raise awareness amongst the shadow super councils that are currently setting up, make sure they're in a good position?
Yeah. I'm not aware of any local councils directly having access to EIB finance to date. We did hold a seminar with local councils, I think it was back in February, where the Finance Minister invited all the chief executives and finance directors of all the local councils, both existing and those we knew that were going to be in place next year, to an awareness session. And there was an official from the EIB actually came across and gave presentations to the councils about the opportunities that there may be. So certainly local councils are fully aware that it's there and it's available.
The research piece found that the project size for EIB finance capital projects, which typically exceed £100 million, is a problem for the devolved administrations, and the SIB advised that as a result of ongoing engagement from both the Department and Strategic Investment Board, in the case of the North, EIB are prepared to consider making investments in projects of lower value. Has any progress been made in regard to those proposals for lower value?
Yeah, after the Minister's visit, we have been in dialogue with the EIB quite extensively over the last few months. You probably aware Invest NI has a number of funds, for example, which was set up a couple of years ago, and at that time, they're using European funding. At the time, they didn't investigate with the EIB whether they would part fund them. At that time, the EIB did say that they were too small for them to be interested. But they do seem to have changed their position now, and they're very keen again to take up a conversation with for example, Invest NI. So when Invest NI go out and procure new funds, I think the EIB will be keen to co-invest. We certainly hope so, and that discussion is now ongoing.
John?
Thanks, Chairman. Probably following on from the Chair's question, it seems to me very much as to how are we going to get this rolled out, or how are we getting councils, to imagine, get thinking, almost their thinking caps on, how are we going to tap into this, where can we use it, can we build up partnerships between, private companies in council areas and use that, can they stretch it out into some of the other asset transfer arrangements? How do you, at the minute it's tapping into it, and as Dahi had said about even that limit, seems very, very high to attain. I mean, is there in your reply, Peter, is there a lower limit in mind as to what will possibly be achievable? If you're talking about, what was your figure, 100 million? Mm-hmm. And that's into big sum of money, even for the Northern Ireland Assembly or the Northern Ireland Executive to be dealing with.
EIB do also do things that they call it a framework loan, which is a loan over several years and for various projects. There's something that might be explored in there, and we are exploring with them. If that's an opportunity, we might be able to avail of. So there are things that we can do. Another thing that the new councils can do, for example, Belfast City Council, which is large, obviously, they might partner with others, partner with private sector partners to deliver large urban regeneration projects and all that. Again, they could, if you bundle those, you can get the scale. So, there are things we can do there, and I think Belfast City Council is definitely interested in looking at those.
There's some of the infrastructure project, maybe in something like housing, the council will end up, if you're bringing it into the rates, they will end up with more rateable value. If you were doing an infrastructure project like a road, it's hard to see how, an area like a council area might benefit directly through its rating system, for that, or how you're going to actually fund it, or what incentive there would be maybe for the council to take on that burden if they're not going to have some payback within.
Yeah, I think they're not going to deliver roads. That's still DRD's.
Yeah, well, I was thrown that because I couldn't see any. You might have argued there's a huge economic benefit with something like road, but you wouldn't have a rateable.
No.
Or a notable rateable increase for.
No, that's right.
I think a lot of things will be driven by need as well. As funding gets tighter and tighter, councils will be nearly forced to try and find innovative solutions to infrastructure problems, and one of them we would hope would be that they would think about how we can usefully use EIB money in loans, maybe combined with other councils, where they can share the kind of the burden across a number of councils to reap an overall benefit.
Mm-hmm. But it's probably getting that out to council and building up the capacity within our council structure, you know, with them grappling at the minute with the whole reform, getting to that point that they can do that. I mean, I accept Peter said that you've had meetings and run a seminar. Is that going, do you envisage that being more an ongoing process and dialogue with councils? Over
I think we're going to have to do more whenever they're set up. Obviously, I think that has to be done to continue that dialogue. Yeah.
Thanks, Chair.
Paul? Thank you very much indeed. I always have appreciate that it's maybe good to have access to fund, but by borrowing money you're always having to pay back, so therefore it's going to come out of your money the following year whenever you're starting to pay back interest on it. So there's always a difficulty that unless it's real cheap money that's not costing you any interest, then that's fine. But there's also a problem that you're going to have to forward or pay it back at some stage. There was the Investment and Reform Initiative. Was that linked through the same process?
Is that the RRI you're talking about?
Yeah.
No, that was basically bought from the UK government.
That was just
directly.
That was
It's just UK government.
UK government.
Yeah. And they gave us a limit of, well, at the moment it's 200 million per year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it's just.
Well, as you say, yes, it creates a long-term liability. But I mean, the executive couldn't avail of this anyway, so I think I see this as private sector partners utilising EIB finance. And I think, the obvious one is the big utility companies.
Yes.
The likes of the electricity, gas investments, tend to be very large scale.
But that's maybe the line that I'm thinking on. Where we have used some of our own funding from DETI, and just use that to maybe roll out. I think there's probably a bit of flexibility. Broadband initiative to ensure that there's access to broadband in all regions of Northern Ireland. Is there not an active work going on to actually encourage the likes of some of the utility companies to actually avail of this, actually help them drive it forward, with the backing of government doing that as well?
Yeah, well, that is fully aware. I mean, we've been briefed them on the EIB, and I know they will talk to the various utility companies. For example, let's take an example, the gas network extension to the west, for example, it did need a government injection to make it viable. There was a clear market failure, so it needed a government grant, okay? But it also needs a large portion of private money coming in. I think the total project is around 100 million. So again, there's an opportunity perhaps for EIB to step in, so the project promoters there could start conversations with EIB to fund that.
What are they like by comparison to loan rates compared to the ordinary commercial bank?
EIB tends to come in at lower rates than the commercial banks, because they can raise the finance so much cheaper.
Yeah, well, it's a line that we should probably be trying to cultivate to ensure that we actually maybe can maybe get some of that money drawn in through some of the utility companies.
I mean, the big benefit to the private companies here is simply they can access cheaper finance. They can deliver the same projects for less.
Yeah.
That is the benefit. It's not. I don't think it creates additional investment in Northern Ireland as such. Many of these projects probably haven't anyway.
Yes.
But the fact that the benefit for companies here is they can finance them cheaper.
Thank you very much.
Leslie?
Thanks, Chair. I think there was a system at one time, I'm just looking through the notes, I don't see it again, that if in fact, say, a local government were financing a project that had European funds, that they could access cheaper borrowing from the EIB. Is that true?
No, not that I'm aware of. I think the EIB will look at the risk of each project, and they will price their finance accordingly. I'm not aware that EU money going in will have any bearing at all. Of course, if it's, well, suppose, if it's part funded by government, if in theory that lower the risk to the EIB. So in that sense, well, I don't think it matters whether it's EIB or EU funding or say executive funding or any other type of public funding going in. I think it's the risk of the project, the price, the finance based on that.
Right, but that would have been done before the grant was issued anyhow. There would have been an evaluation of business case.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. And any project the EIB will finance, they will look at the risk and they look at the return they would expect based on that risk.
Try not to be sceptical, but why would you want to borrow from the EIB now for the Northern Ireland Executive if in fact it's going to come off your capital deal?
No, we won't. We won't be looking to do that at all. Because it just doesn't make any
Let's
sense.
turn that round up positive, and how do we change that so that it does become a benefit?
We can't because it's Treasury rules, Treasury spending
Treasury
rules, and
rules.
Treasury aren't going to change their spending rules. 'Cause the last thing they want is the whole administration's going out borrowing extra money now. When their whole policy is to reduce borrowing.
Yeah, they want
You know,
the indebtedness down, yeah.
Yeah. So I can't see that changing.
How do the EIB rates compare with the RRI rates?
I don't know. EIB rates are confidential, so
Oh.
I haven't got, they keep them commercially confidential, so I haven't got their rates. But if you think about it, the rates we borrow from Treasury is based on the UK government borrowing costs, whereas EIB funding finance is based on the cost of EIB borrowing in the capital markets. And since that's underpinned by all the EU member states, the European Investment Bank could probably be seen as a lower risk than even the UK government. So they can probably access finance cheaper than the UK government can.
But would it not be good business practice to reschedule our loans if we find, in fact, that the EIB
cheaper.
was a lot cheaper?
In theory, you could, yeah.
Would that not be a case that could be put to them that 1.7 million or billion, whatever we happen to have, what would their rate of interest be for that? Would that be a good exercise?
In theory, it sounds like a doable thing. However, there's a lot of transaction costs when you deal with EIB. You have to get, for example, EIB board approval for each loan, and they'll want to look at the projects. They want to add,
Could you not
they'll want to-
discuss it in principle?
I still think the transactions cost involved would be far too high to avoid that. I doubt there would be much difference anyway, to be honest.
But there is an issue there, isn't there?
Well,
You should really know that.
In theory, the UK government have a borrowing limit for all of the UK, and they will go out on a daily basis or whatever it is to borrow funding from various sources right across the international markets. If we say to the UK, instead of you providing the money for us directly from that borrowing at a UK level, we will borrow from the EIB. I suspect that the rate that we will get from the EIB will not be as good as the rate that the UK get on the international markets. So I would suspect that whenever we delve into that, that the rates that the UK get would be cheaper to provide us with our RRI borrowing than we would get directly going to the EIB. And if there was a differential in the cost, I would be quite certain that the Treasury would pass it on to us.
Yeah, you have to remember as well, Treasury does give us an extremely low margin on top of what they can borrow for. And I'm not sure the EIB would do that. They might be able to access cheaper finance in the capital markets or around the same as the UK government, but it doesn't mean they'll pass all that on to us.
Yeah.
But there is a European link in all of this. And whilst I accept what you say, Jeff, still some doubt as to whether or not we could get cheaper borrowing from the European Investment Bank. Is that not something that would be put to them as a principle?
Yeah, we could, but I very much doubt that's the case.
Okay, thanks.
In terms of the draft borrowing strategy, where are we at with that now?
The
Minister referred to back in June.
The Minister has, remember Jeff has submitted a borrowing strategy to the Executive.
Yeah, but I think the draft borrowing strategy was discussed at BRG, and it was agreed that it would be considered as part of the wider budget process.
Okay. What does it look like? Give us a broad overview of what.
Just in broad terms, the borrowing strategy will look at what we're borrowing, the overall level of indebtedness, and how we would maybe consider that going forward. I mean, what's a prudent level of borrowing? How can we maybe cap that, or how can the Assembly or the Executive seek to cap that at a level that is sustainable going forward? So that's probably as much as I can say.
In terms of the statutory borrowing limit of £3 billion, that covers the executive councils, housing executive schools and so on. See, with the RPA process and the larger councils, would that limit still be sufficient, or does that change things somewhat?
That limit is looked at fairly regularly, so we will do projections on when we think that limit will come to an end. Now, it's very difficult to say with the new councils coming in, because simply we've no data in historical terms to compare to see what that might look like. But we will be continuing to look at that to make sure that it is sufficient, and if it isn't, we will then have to consider whether we either raise it again by legislation or seek to cap borrowing to maintain that level.
Where do we sit at in regard to the limit?
I think
the total at the moment is about 1.8 billion. Total
that's
amount of
our
outstanding
RRI.
debt.
Or is that an average?
That's the total outstanding net debt.
Not really.
Plus
I think that's
executive
just
and-
I think that's just RRI. I don't think that.
I think it's
RRI
executive and,
does it? Partnering councils as well.
Yeah, from memory. Yeah.
Okay.
1.76495.
Okay. There we go.
Yeah.
Exact.
There you go.
Okay, members, any more questions? Okay, enough. Okay, gentlemen, thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, moving on to correspondence.
Okay, Chair, just 6 items of correspondence, Chair. First item is from the OFMDF Committee Investment Strategy Implementation Report. Is just for members to note. The second item is at page 152 of the pack, and that's OFMDFM Committee writing again with a report on progress against Programme for Government commitments across all departments. And just in terms of the DFP commitments, I think I mentioned earlier, several of the commitments are already completed and concluded, but there are a number, just maybe members might wish to note in terms of apparent underperformance, and they're on pages 181, 183 and 184 of the pack respectively, and they're in relation to social clauses, online services and sickness absence. So just for members to maybe note at this stage, those issues will can be pursued by the committee in the course of its work during the next session, because I think they're all covered in the work programme, Chair. So, but it's just at this stage for members to note. Then there's correspondence from the AL committee, and that's at page 185 again. That's for noting. At page 186 of the pack, the all-party group on construction has written to the committee regarding the issue of the investment strategy portal and the flaws in terms of, or shortcomings in terms of information data on that portal. And this is an issue which the Construction Employers Federation raised with this committee previously. Just to remind members that the DFP had previously indicated to this committee after it pursued the matter following the Construction Employers Federation raising the issue, the department indicated that it was the responsibility of each individual department to maintain accurate information on the ISNI portal. As such, this committee wrote to each of the other statutory committees to request that they raise these shortcomings with their respective departments and seek assurance that accurate and timely information will be provided on the portal as applicable. So it is an issue that needs to be scrutinised at a departmental level by each committee, and this committee on an occasional basis could remind other committees or could seek an update from the Construction Employers Federation in terms of the quality of data that's on the portal. Very, very important for local companies in terms of access to public procurement. So there's a draft response to the all-party group at page 3 of table papers, just to reflect that this committee did look at the issue and got a response from the department and did pursue the issue with other committees. So it's just that members are content for that to issue in the meantime. That's at page 3 of table papers.
Okay, members.
And then there's correspondence to the Education Committee to the DFP regarding free school meals. That's for noting. There's correspondence from the Committee for Education, again at page 191 of the pack, which is an invite to a STEM Sentinels event in the Long Gallery on the Wednesday, the 1st of October. It's a walk-in type event. I think it's between 10:30 and 12:30. Members can drop in to that. But I just asked members to reply directly to that, to the invitation, and reply directly to the Education Committee. And then finally, Chair, there's an invite to attend an annual Northern Ireland Economic Conference, and that's at page 5 of table papers. And that's from Agenda NI. They're inviting the committee to be guests at that conference, and that's on Tuesday the 7th of October in the Culloden. Basically an all-day programme, so staff will contact members individually just to check who's available to attend that.
Okay.
All the correspondence, sir.
The members' draft work programme, pages 196 to 199. Members content?
Yeah, that will be updated just to reflect the discussions during the
Yeah.
strategic planning workshop.
IR business. Okay, next meeting will be Wednesday, 1st of October, 10 a.m, same place.